For so many years, I was convinced that I needed to just communicate better. I was reading books, I was following people's advice, and when it came down to it, I was still just shutting down in conversations, or avoiding them altogether, or even getting angry and blowing up, saying things that I regretted later. It took me many years and a divorce and even some time after that to realize that communication was not my problem. It was my disconnection from my nervous system and myself. So I'm going to share my story of that struggle and what changed so that I can give you some practical tools for working with your emotions and your nervous system so they don't work you. I struggled for decades to communicate in relationships and with my family members. And the advice that I kept getting, which is probably the advice you're getting too, is very oversimplified. It's just talk about it, communicate better, be more empathetic, listen more, put yourself in their shoes, and all of these very clickbaity pieces of advice that don't actually get you anywhere. There's never any advice about how to actually make those things happen. So meanwhile, in real important conversations, I find my voice shaking, my whole body clenching up. I'm hot and sweaty. My mind is going blank. And it wasn't that I didn't want to be communicating better. I loved these people. It was that I couldn't access empathy or listening. I couldn't think clearly in the moment. My nervous system was hijacked by fight or flight, and I had no idea. It wasn't until through the course of my divorce, I had been in therapy for 6 months or so at the time already, so I was gaining some skill with naming and understanding my emotions, like most of us do in therapy, and that still wasn't helping me communicate any better. I would still shut down or get really defensive in these conversations, and it really wasn't until a little bit after my divorce when I came across some people doing some really good work and some really good content around how the nervous system and these fight or flight responses affect our communication and our connection and our attachment. This was at the same time that I had just started grad school for speech pathology, so now I'm learning in a very scientific way that I need to help patients and their families regulate themselves emotionally before even attempting to build communication skills. So I was starting to realize that for 20-something years, I was trying to have important conversations while alarms were just blaring in my body, and I had no idea. But thanks to my own struggle with it and this very timely exposure to these concepts, I learned that you can't actually have healthy, mature communication without emotional regulation first. And as I mentioned, like so many of us in therapy, I had already gained the skills of naming my emotions and starting to understand them cognitively. But that was missing a step, a very crucial step of actually just feeling all of what I was feeling and making space for that in my nervous system. So that's what I mean when I say emotional regulation. It's feeling through the whole experience of something before trying to name it and understand it. And what I found myself doing was giving things the wrong names and assigning the wrong understanding cognitively to my felt experience because I was so obsessed with the naming and the understanding and hadn't taken the time to feel through things. So for example, I very often found myself hurt by what somebody had said and afraid of what they might say next. And you can already hear the sort of oppositional and defensive dynamic that creates, that this naming and understanding had created for me. It wasn't until I learned a little bit of how to feel through my emotional experience and make space for it in my body that I realized the pain was actually of not being understood by that person. And the fear was more like confusion at not understanding them and why they were responding the way they were. So you can see that the naming and understanding of emotions isn't enough to actually create safety in connection, to create an internal sense of safety and to feel safe in this conversation connecting with this person, which is a really vulnerable thing. So I want to give you a very quick framework for not just naming and understanding your emotions, but feeling through them and starting to regulate yourself to bring that sense of safety into your conversations. The first step of emotional regulation is, of course, noticing your state. Your physical state is the cue for what is emotionally going on, and you can think of a traffic light. I really like this analogy where a green light is calm, safe, maybe even playful, and very open to connection, very warm and connected with another person. The yellow light is a bit more anxious and like, oh, I need to mobilize, I need to do something I'm not safe. And the red light is that I am so unsafe that I'm shut down. I'm constricted. My mind is blank. I cannot engage at all. So if that's helpful for you, check in with where you might be at on the traffic light. Also just noticing, am I tense? And where am I carrying that tension? Am I hot and sweaty? Is my heart racing? These basic physical states, really taking a moment to check in from the neck down and notice what's going on in your body is step one. Once you have noticed your state, then you can make more space within your body for what all is going on and start to shift or regulate that state. The most accessible way to do this, since everyone already knows how to breathe, is breathing. Taking a few intentional breaths into all of that sensation in the body and making more space for it is a very quick and efficient way to make that space and to feel through everything that's going on. And it's already self-soothing. When we are giving our attention and our breath to a felt emotional experience, that's already starting to soothe some of it and regulate and create a little bit of safety in our bodies. So breath is the most accessible. Any other physically grounding activity that works for you, even literally laying on the ground, is something I do often. I personally also like to stretch, and this throws my partner for a loop when we're in the middle of an important conversation and I'm like, hey, I'm listening, but I'm going to be in a forward fold for a minute. So check in with yourself and with your partner about what might be a little bit jarring. When things get really intense for me and I feel that red light about to happen, I like to pause and just take a lap around the block. And that's another thing that can be a little bit activating for a person's nervous system to disconnect when things feel really important and really urgent. So check in with yourself about that. But I find that the space from the conversation, as well as the physical movement and the gentle breath, really helps me to regulate and re-center on an internal sense of safety. And then come back to the conversation, which is step 3. So you've noticed your state, you have started to regulate and shift and make space for that state, and now you're a little bit more soothed and safe, and you can come back to the conversation. I want to put this in the context of a very real-life example, so you can see kind of a before and after, like what a conversation without this regulation step might look like versus what it might look like to have that same conversation from a place of regulation and safety. Early on, the first couple of months that I was dating my partner, she kept hearing from her ex, and text messages and emails that he was trying to get some kind of closure or something, and she didn't want anything to do with it. It felt safer for her nervous system to just ignore it and distance herself from it because she didn't want to engage at all with this person. I was starting to gain this understanding of the nervous system and how it interacts with communication and attachment, so that made a lot of sense to me. But it happened a couple of times where she heard from him while her and I were hanging out. She would get a text or a phone call, and it was very disruptive. It puts her nervous system in an activated state, and now we are a little bit disconnected because of that. And so I was frustrated. And the second time that it happened, I felt such a surge of heat and anger that this was happening instead of giving myself this moment to regulate, it boiled over. And I came at my partner with something like, why haven't you just blocked his number? Why are you letting him still reach out to you? Just tell him to leave you alone. These sorts of things. And you can hear the accusatory, oppositional kind of dynamic that I'm creating there. And you can hear the stories, this misunderstanding that I'm telling myself about my emotional experience. This very cognitive, like she might still have feelings for the guy. She's not telling me the whole story. All these things that my brain is doing to try to make sense of the anger that I'm feeling, rather than just letting myself feel the anger and regulate a little bit first. So you can imagine how that conversation went. It was very tense, and we left both feeling pretty frustrated and pretty anxious. Thankfully, a few days later, we got to revisit the conversation, and this time I made a lot of time for myself to regulate, to feel through everything and make space for it in my body before even meeting up. I went on a few long walks and did a body scan, which is another really direct and helpful way of checking in with your body and starting to self-soothe, just making space for it. Got myself into a very regulated and safe state, even with all of the anger that I was feeling. And that's how I came into the conversation. And at the beginning of the conversation, I suggested that her and I both just sit together in silence and breathe to regulate before even starting. And sure enough, we were able to stay calm and connected throughout the conversation. It took a long time, but we had the conversation. It was difficult, but we were safe and connected. And we came out of that conversation even feeling a lot more together and bonded, because we were able to do that difficult thing together. So we went from tense and angry and boiling over and dysregulated to having just given ourselves a few moments to regulate, calm and connected. So I encourage you, the next time you are in a hard conversation or anticipating one that maybe you've been avoiding, don't start with the words, with the naming and the understanding. Start with your body. Give it what it needs, make some space for all of the feelings that are swirling around in there. Ground and regulate, and then come to the conversation from that place of regulation and safety. If any of this resonated, I share a lot more of these trauma-informed tools for dating, for relationships, for everyday communication here on the channel and in my monthly workshops, so check those out. Please give this a try and be gentle with yourself, and let me know how it goes.